You talked about people using this carnivore diet potentially as a reset. For somebody wanting to do that, what are the initial carnivore foods that they would want to allow? And then how long till they start introducing other things?
Yeah, so again, the simplicity of carnivore is one of the things that I like most about it. It's real kind of black and white. If it comes from an animal, it's part of the carnivore diet, right? So these are going to be your meats of all kinds. These are going to be seafood, I include in there, and these are going to be eggs and dairy products, right? That come from the animals, and that's what you include on a carnivore diet. And if you're doing a very strict version of a carnivore diet, you're not going to have anything else beyond that, right? You may not even use things like spices that comes from plants. Now, again, do most people need to go that extreme? Probably not, but some people do. And I always encourage people, to start with a 60-day trial. I think that's a good amount of time to start to really, and again, a lot of this is about what you're not eating, right? The processed food and getting that stuff, the effects from that all sort of flushed out of your system is the way to think about that. So 60 days, I think, is a good thing. Some people, they say, well, I can only do 30. So I'm like, okay, start with 30. And at the end of 30, they're usually like, you know what, I'm feeling pretty good on this and I can do this. So I'm going to go 60, 90 days, right? Whatever it might be. And then, like I said, you really get a baseline of how good we're supposed to feel. One of the very kind of insidious things that has happened in our society is most people don't actually understand what good feels like. I mentioned earlier, we've become accepting of things like it's just normal to be bloated after you eat. It's normal not to have full energy. The little aches and pains that starts to sneak into life for many people, right? And everyone says, "Oh, well, that just happens when you get older." It's not the way it's supposed to be. We are supposed to be able to function optimally, well into our lifespan. And we've lost the appreciation of that because, quite frankly, we look all around us, and everyone else around us has these things, and so we say, oh, well, it's normal. But it turns out you don't need to have those things. And, eating a carnivore diet can be a great approach to show you how good you're supposed to feel. And then you say, okay, I miss whatever it might be. I'm going to try reintroducing it. And I encourage people to do that kind of systematically, pick one or two things at a time and, reintroduce it for a week or two. And if at the end of that time you still feel that same optimal level that you felt without it, great. Your body tolerates it. You can incorporate it. But if you don't, if you start to notice, oh, that ache and pain that had gone away, all of a sudden it's back, that's the signal that your body is not reacting well to that food and you don't want to incorporate it. Now, within the carnivore framework, are there things that some people do not react well to? The answer is yes. And dairy is probably the big one here. Some people, dairy is problematic to them. And I'll oftentimes tell them, you might want to start your carnivore diet without the dairy. Now, dairy is interesting in that a lot of the people who have negative reactions, right? They'll say they're lactose intolerant, they're dairy intolerant. It turns out it's because of that underlying gut inflammation. And if you give a carnivore diet a chance and you heal up the gut inflammation, I have had many patients who said, I can't tolerate dairy. They go on the dairy-free version of the carnivore for 30, 60, 90 days. And they then reintroduce dairy and they tolerate it just fine. Because it wasn't really the dairy itself that was the problem. It was this leaky gut that was altering, the proteins and stuff that got across that barrier that was causing the problem. And the gut healed, and now they can tolerate things like dairy, which has been a very interesting phenomena, like I said, that I've observed multiple times now in my patients.
For somebody with gut issues, can you think of a better way to heal the gut than going carnivore minus the dairy for that 30, 60 days?
No, I really can't at this point. Clinically, I haven't seen it, and like I said, there are lots of protocols and stuff that are out there and people go through and they do these, the cleanses, right? We hear about, and I have not come across anything that performs as well as a carnivore elimination diet.
Somebody who is now excited about this, they're on a standard type diet right now.
Yep.
They make the switch, they do it pretty extreme and go right in.
Yep.
What are some of the things you want to give them a heads up on that they might experience changes in their body?
So the first thing to understand is if you're coming from a high carbohydrate diet and you're going to a low carbohydrate diet, there are important hormonal and biochemical changes that are going to occur. So, for instance, your insulin level starts dropping. And one of the things that happens is that alters within the kidney how you're handling electrolytes, things like sodium and initially, as your body is making that adjustment, you're going to lose more sodium in the urine, and you need to replace that. So this is why we usually advise, salt on your food, good high quality sea salt, and a lot of people need to supplement with electrolytes. And sodium and magnesium are probably the two biggest ones. So salt, maybe using a magnesium supplement. There are lots of kind of those electrolyte supplements out there, and those are oftentimes necessary when you're first transitioning from a high carb diet to a low carb diet. And of course, a carnivore is going to be a very low carbohydrate diet, essentially a zero carbohydrate diet. So that would be the big one. The other thing that people need to understand is that your primary energy source that your body is going to use is going to be shifting from sugar, right, to fat. Um, and you need to account for that. So having enough fat in the diet becomes very important. And again, most people, right, our whole lives, we've been programmed against consuming fat. So people go on the carnivore diet and they're like, well, I'm going to eat my lean chicken breast, right? I'm going to eat my lean cuts of meat only. And they don't recognize the importance of, no, we actually need that fat. That's our energy source now. And that's another common area where I see people kind of get tripped up initially.
How does that change as a person is on this diet longer? And the reason I ask that, somebody coming to it, oftentimes is going to have a lot extra fat on their body.
Yep.
Is it early on the body is not good at pulling that fat and using it as energy, so we have to bring it in through the diet?
Correct. And this specifically has to do with the effects of insulin. So we think most people, when they think insulin, they think, okay, insulin is there to get the sugar out of the bloodstream, lower the blood sugar level. And yes, that's something that it does. But one of the things that they don't recognize is when your insulin level is high, it blocks your body from accessing the body fat, from pulling the fat out to use for energy. So again, people that are coming from a high carb diet that have high insulin levels, they're probably insulin resistant. They may be diabetic, right? Type 2 diabetes, that's the basic biochemical thing in type 2 diabetes is your insulin level is high, and therefore your body is blocked from accessing your body fat, and that's why you're going to need to eat high fat um, to give your body that energy. Now, after an adaptation time, right, your insulin level has now come down because you're not eating the carbohydrates. Now you might not need quite as much fat in your diet. And now we can let our body start to burn that body fat, right, which is what most of us want and need to do. And so oftentimes as people are, getting settled in on their carnivore diet, we might have them, lower the fat some. you never want to go very low fat. Because again, like I said, the nutrients in many cases are stored within that animal fat. It's essential, right, to get the nutrients from that standpoint and to have some fat to use for energy. But, many people can kind of back off a little bit so that we can start burning more of our body fat.
How do you think about ketosis? For yourself, other people eating this way? Is that something you're naturally going to fall into? And then is that important?
Yeah, so yes, you're going to naturally fall into it. When you eat, when you're not eating carbohydrates any longer, your body is going to get to burning fat and you're going to start to make some ketones. Now, you may not make a lot of ketones. And everyone always asks, is that important? Should I be testing my ketone level? Should I be looking at your ketone levels? And again, the answer ultimately becomes, well, it depends. It depends on what your goals are, what you're dealing with. There are certain conditions where being in higher level of ketosis, having more ketones in your bloodstream, is clearly beneficial. The three big ones that I always point people to for this are um, neuropsychiatric conditions, right? So again, think back. The first use of a ketogenic diet clinically was to treat seizures, treat epilepsy in children. So obviously, it must be having some sort of effect on the brain. We now, over the past couple of years, have realized what a major impact ketones have on the brain. We have a new field called metabolic psychiatry, where there are amazing people out there like Christopher Palmer, like Georgia Ede, and so many others that they are treating advanced psychiatric illnesses like schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder with ketogenic diets. And they're having amazing results. They're getting people off of medication, off of these powerful antipsychotic and, other psychiatric medications with just changing diet. So, brain conditions, neuropsychiatric conditions is number one. Heart failure is another area where having higher levels of ketones have been demonstrated to be beneficial. It turns out that the heart loves ketones. Many people don't realize that there is a direct connection, anatomic connection between our intestines and our heart. There's a structure, it's called the thoracic duct. And what that does is part of the fats that we eat, right? The first place they go is right to the heart. They bypass the liver. And they do this because the heart loves fat as fuel. It loves ketones as fuel. So patients that are dealing with impaired heart function, heart failure, they can benefit from ketones and having higher levels of ketones. And the third condition that higher levels of ketosis may be beneficial in is as a adjunctive cancer therapy. And so those are a couple of the situations where I tell people, yeah, you probably need to test your ketone levels and you may need to adjust your diet in such a way that you can get those real high levels of ketones. People that are just kind of going for general health, weight loss and those types of things, probably not as important. It can be beneficial. Some people find it useful to do that as a kind of guide to help them determine, ultimately, right, if you're on a carnivore diet, the only macro variability, and I'm talking about the food macros, right? The macro variability is going to be how much protein versus how much fat. And, and that's going to determine how much ketosis you ultimately get into, how much, what level of ketones you ultimately generate. And so, in some situations, paying attention to that and testing it is useful. In a lot of situations, it's not.
So it sounds like it when it comes to carnivore and people that aren't producing the ketones like they would like to, that's because of the up protein and this protein bolus that's going to cause gluconeogenesis. Is that right?
Correct. So, our bodies can convert protein to glucose. to make energy. Again, it's not a preferred way for our body to make energy. It turns out that it's a fairly inefficient way to make energy, but if our body doesn't have a choice, it's going to do that. So again, if we're in a situation, for instance, where there's someone is insulin resistant and they're not accessing their body fat well, and they're not consuming enough fat, the body's going to take the protein that they are consuming and it's going to do gluconeogenesis, convert it to glucose, and use that for energy. And in a situation like that, I may be advising people, okay, you want to back off the protein some. Again, we're not going low protein, and you want to start adding some more fat to your diet so that we can get you into, a more ketotic state, more ketones, less glucose as our fuel source.
So it's obvious you're not fearing fat.
Yeah.
But for the average carnivore who isn't seeking ketones, how do you feel about adding fats to things like a ribeye, putting butter on top, adding heavy cream to coffees? Is that something you ever advocate for patients or something you do?
Well, I basically tell people to kind of titrate your fat intake to your energy levels, right? The way that I kind of start to construct carnivore diets with people is, okay, let's set your protein goal. Let's figure out how much protein you need. And again, my starting point is usually around 1 gram of protein for each pound of lean body mass or ideal body mass that you're kind of targeting. So, and again, for most people, that's going to fall somewhere between 100 to 150 grams of protein a day as a rough starting point. Um, and then I tell people, eat the fat that comes with it, right? And, again, I tell people, don't fear the fatty cuts of meat. You don't have to have ribeyes all the time. You can, but, you don't have to for most people. Do a kind of mix and, you'll end up at a certain fat level and then see how you feel. And if you feel like your energy levels aren't adequate, if you are someone who is targeting higher levels of ketones for maybe one of those reasons we discussed earlier, then yeah, start adding more fat. Now, some people from just a enjoyment perspective, right? They want to add a lot of fat at the beginning. And I usually don't discourage them from doing that. But if they then reach a point, and this comes up most commonly in the context of people are trying to lose weight. And they're like, I went on my low carb carnivore diet. I lost a bunch of weight at first, and then it kind of stopped. And now I'm kind of stuck. Or maybe I'm even gaining back a little bit of weight. And that's usually where we'll start looking at, well, how much of the extra fat are you consuming? Are you putting more butter on? Are you putting a lot of cream or even butter in your coffee, which is popular? And maybe, that's an area we want to start to back off of a little bit. Like I said, I don't tell anyone you need to be on a low fat diet. I really, I can't think of a situation where I've recommended a lean carnivore diet, right? You do need the fat, you do want some fat, but yeah, like everything in our society, sometimes that gets taken to the extreme. And, everyone thinks they need, every meal needs to be a ribeye with a lot of butter on it. And they need to be drinking all sorts of heavy cream in their coffee. And most people don't need that. Most of us have the body fat, right? That we can, when we're able to utilize it, we should be utilizing it.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
Early on in my career as a heart surgeon, I learned there was a link between oral health and heart health. People that have periodontal disease, those people are at higher risk of having